Chuck Baldwin ran in 2008 as the Constitution Party's presidential candidate. He's also a writer and radio talk show host. Chuck breaks down the left-right paradigm and how the globalists are in control of both major political parties. He talks about solutions and actions the American people can take to reverse the New World Order's criminal agenda and restore our republic.
I'm Chuck Baldwin. I'm a syndicated columnist, radio talk show host, and for 35 years, the pastor of Crossroad Baptist Church in Pensacola, Florida. I'm the husband of one, the father of three, and the grandfather of seven. I've said all over the country that I believe that we have far more to fear from Washington, D.C. than we do from Tehran or from Afghanistan or some other foreign entity. The Founding Fathers recognized that, and I think that we need to start recognizing it again today. The potential for tyranny, usurpation of power, etc., is far greater from the central government in D.C. than it is from any foreign entity. My main reason for running in 2008 was because Dr. Ron Paul was defeated in the Republican primary. I was supporting him during that primary. In fact, I traveled to several states endorsing his candidacy. I believe his message of constitutional government is exactly the message that America needed and still needs. When it became obvious that he would not be the Republican nominee, several people, including those within the Constitution Party, urged me to consider becoming their candidate in 2008 so that the message of constitutional government could continue throughout the general election process. Obviously, a lot of prayer and thought went into that, but at the end of the day, I accepted that challenge, and the Constitution Party committee and the membership of that organization chose me to be their nominee in 2008 for president. And so I traveled throughout the 50 states doing the same thing that Ron Paul was doing, and that is speaking the message of constitutional government.
We'd like to address some of the FEMA and national emergency issues during our interview today. And one of those items that's come up over the past few years are the clergy response teams. We've had leaked information about pastors being used for those purposes. Could you tell us what you know about that and
Yeah.
what concerns you?
I've heard the same thing. In fact, I had a pastor friend of mine from Ohio that told me that he was solicited by FEMA representatives for that purpose. And he actually attended one of their training seminars. And he and I had a lengthy discussion over the telephone as he relayed to me the information that was given out and what they were trying to do. There's no question that there was a concerted effort, and probably still is, to enlist pastors and clergymen to be part of some kind of, as you said, a clergy response team. And the primary goal of that would be to use the clergymen to encourage their constituents, their parishioners, etc., to submit to whatever governmental decree would come down in the event of a national emergency, including the confiscation of firearms. And of course, that's something that I would never do. In fact, when I found out about it, I told my church here in Pensacola that not only would I never encourage them to give up their firearms, I would instead encourage them to go buy one if they didn't have one and buy more if they already had one. So obviously, I have not received a personal invitation to one of these seminars, but I certainly have understood and believe that they do exist and are continuing.
We know that since National Security Act was passed back in 1947, we've had black budgets and unaccountable CIA and other activity. And earlier this year, the Washington Post reported that in top secret USA, we now have more than 800,000 people working under national security clearance, basically totally untrackable. Could you speak to that and how we should address accountability in government?
Yeah, I wrote a column on that, as a matter of fact. And I think my good friend Joel Skousen over in Utah has done some really great research into that as well. It's really unbelievable that this kind of dark operation would be taking place behind the scenes. We have many good federal agents in every level of government, in every agency, that have no idea whatsoever that these dark operations are going on behind the scenes and out of view. many times illegally, unlawfully, unconstitutionally, and almost always surreptitiously. I've talked to federal agents myself who have indicated of some of the things that they've seen and are very concerned about. There's no question that these rogue elements are in existence behind the scenes within our federal government. I think the Founding Fathers tried to avert this kind of a thing as best they could by the way they established this form of government. For example, we have 3 equal branches of government within the federal government. Each was designed to be a check and balance against the other. Obviously, for the last several decades, that check and balance has not worked. Beyond that, they incorporated into the Bill of Rights the Second Amendment, which gives the right of the people to defend themselves against tyrannical government. And the Second Amendment was never about duck hunting or target shooting. It was always about the right of the people to defend themselves against tyrannical government within their own country. But then they also, I think, very brilliantly incorporated something that's never really been tried before in the annals of human government, and that is the principle of federalism, which means you have 2 existing authorities and jurisdictions operating side by side. You have the federal central government and you have state government. Each has its own sphere of authority and jurisdiction. And because of that, we have states, especially certain states, that see what's happening many times in the usurpation of constitutional jurisdiction, and they're beginning to rise up. We've got the Montana Firearms Freedom Act and the Tennessee Firearms Freedom Act. We've got Arizona fighting the federal government over illegal immigration. There are some 20 states that are in lawsuit right now against the federal government over the Obamacare plan, et cetera, et cetera. So I really believe that the future hope for America in terms of freedom and liberty is going to be in those states that are willing to stand for their own authority and jurisdiction as prescribed by the Constitution. The Anti-Federalists obviously were not in favor of the newly proposed Constitution at all, and they felt that it was actually worse than the Articles of Confederation, which it replaced. And without the implementation of the Bill of Rights, the first 10 articles, there's no question that the Constitution would not have passed in the state legislatures, and there would not be a Constitution as we know it today. The Bill of Rights was absolutely critical, essential to the adoption of the Constitution. And the states obviously did not, at that point in time in 1787, give up their own personal sovereignty. And that's the thing that so many people have forgotten is, the states created the federal government, not the other way around. And after the federal government was created in 1787 by the enactment of the Constitution, the states still retained all of their jurisdiction and authority. And as Thomas Jefferson said in the Declaration, the states are free and independent. They were before the Constitution was ratified, and they were after the Constitution was ratified. And so I think that, once again, the state rights movement is going to be the surest way for freedom-loving citizens in 21st century America to regain the liberties that have been usurped by the federal government in Washington, D.C. People are beginning to realize that the CFR and the Bilderbergers and the Trilateral is not just a social club for people to get together once a year or however to play golf, that these people really are the movers and shakers of governments around the world. And so much of what is decided about what's going to happen internationally is determined not by the legislative or even executive bodies of government, but in these international cabals known as the CFR and all these related organizations that are really probably the ones that are most influential in determining international affairs. I think the Tea Party started out admirably. What most people don't want to admit is that the Tea Parties actually began in 2007 as a part of Congressman Ron Paul's bid for the presidency in the 2008 election. It was at that time pretty much exclusively a Ron Paul for President organization, or at least an organization affiliated with his campaign. It was grassroots then. Of course, it's still grassroots now. But I think over the years, since the election in 2008, I think the Tea Party movement, because it has shown a great deal of success and influence in the political process, I think that many within the neocon population of the Republican Party see the Tea Party as antithetical to their agenda, and therefore, rather than try and oppose it openly, as maybe the Democrats are doing, they're trying to take it over internally and refocus the energy and the philosophy of the Tea Party movement. And so I think right now, the Tea Party movement is really maybe two movements in one. It's the Ron Paul revolutionaries, the pro-Constitution. They're not enamored with either major party. They don't go in for this left-right or Republican-Democrat paradigm, as you talked about. They are independent. They believe in the Constitution, limited government, everything that I talk about. Then you've got, I think, the infiltration of the Newt Gingrich side of the aisle, men that are basically liberals in conservative clothing that are trying to hijack the party. And I think that it's yet to be seen exactly which way the Tea Party is going to go. I'm excited about what they've done, and I'm excited about some of the things that they appear to be doing. But again, between now and 2012, it's going to be seen as to what exactly becomes of the Tea Parties. I've spoken at Tea Party groups all over the country, large and small, and most of the people I've met are just really great people, and they got their priorities right and so forth. But again, I'm a little concerned about the neocon, Newt Gingrich part of the movement. If they continue to get more and more influential within the Tea Party movement, then as far as I'm concerned, the push and the movement toward constitutional government, limited government, et cetera, is going to be DOA in 2012. If the Tea Party movement will retain its integrity, if they will stick to its principles, and they will continue to uncompromisingly promote the Constitution, limited government, the Bill of Rights, all the things that we have heard about in association with the Tea Party movement, if they'll continue to do that, I think they could be extremely influential, both in 2010 in the fall elections, and more importantly in 2012, as the momentum will continue to grow. If, however, they begin to compromise their convictions, and they begin to abandon their principles, and they begin to follow the Pied Pipers of the neocon agenda like Newt Gingrich, then they will be neutered to the point that their effectiveness will be all but destroyed. And by 2012, they will be a non-issue. As Barry Goldwater said in '68, there isn't a dime's worth of difference between the GOP and the Democrats. And as Pat Buchanan said, they're two wings of the same bird of prey. They're both walking in the same direction. That's why it doesn't matter if you elect Bill Clinton or George W. Bush. Nothing changes. It doesn't matter whether you have the Republicans in charge of the Congress or the Democrats. Very little changes. It's the same overall direction. More and more government, more and more internationalism. The UN is augmented and strengthened. The states and individual rights continue to be trampled. We see this burgeoning police state, the Patriot Act, and all the related agencies and so forth that come as a result of that have happened under both the Republican and Democrat administrations and Congresses. So again, at the national level, I think it goes back to maybe what you're talking about with some of these other more influential groups that seem to be much more effective in exerting their will upon Washington politics, regardless of which party is in power. And until the American people, I think, wake up and throw away this ridiculous two-party partisanship and just get into the issues of right and wrong and and the Constitution and limited government and the principles upon which America was built. Until we do that, we're not going to have any lasting solution. Whenever America decided that they would accept the Federal Reserve System, and whenever they decided that they would allow a private cartel of international bankers control the economic wherewithal of the United States, and through the implementation of the Federal Reserve Act and the direct income tax, and I would even add to that the way they expunged the principles of the 17th Amendment. I think all that goes together. The net result was America left sound money principles that had guided it from its very inception. The founders were absolutely crystal clear that America must retain its sound money principles, gold and silver backed currency in exchange. This fiat money supply, this Federal Reserve dominated money system that we have today is responsible for virtually every economic downturn and every recessionary period, including the Great Depression and the recession that we are now in today. It is a direct result of the manipulation of the American money supply and the economy and economic ventures by this cabal of international bankers who, as the people suffer in tough economic times, they continue to increase their own wealth and their own power exponentially. And so once again, this is where I would really agree with Ron Paul. You know, it's not enough that we audit the Fed. We've got to eliminate the Fed. We've got to get rid of the Federal Reserve. And we've got to bring America back to sound money principles. And again, this is where the states can rise to the occasion. The states have the power and the authority to in their own states, have sound money principles established within the borders of their states. And I think ultimately that's what they're going to have to do.
But the encouraging thing is the Federal Reserve, for instance, is a national issue for probably the first time in history, and people are learning about it.
Correct, and I think that's because of Ron Paul's campaign in 2008. I believe that he was the one that articulated that issue when nobody else was willing to talk about it, and even though he lost the election, his ideas prevailed. And since 2008, what's happened to the economy? What's happened to our money supply? What's happened to the overall economic well-being of our country? Everything that Ron Paul said in 2008 has come to pass in the next 2 years. And so now the American people are looking back at the message that Ron Paul delivered in 2008, and they're saying, you know, he was right, and everybody else on the platform was wrong. And that's why I think we have people today that are, for the first time, as you noted, being willing to at least look at the idea of either auditing the Fed or, as I suggest, getting rid of the Fed altogether. You know, the MIAC report was not new. It was just at that time the latest. But the thing that was new in the MIAC report was, for the first time, a police agency, in this particular case, the Missouri State Police Agency, but as you know, they receive their information from the fusion centers, which is controlled by the Department of Homeland Security. For the first time, that report identified 3 individuals by name and accused their followers of being potential violent extremists. And those 3 individuals were myself, Chuck Baldwin, Ron Paul, and Bob Barr. Now, that was the thing that was unique about the MIAC report. Interestingly, they received so much opposition, not only from the citizens of Missouri, but from people all over America, that they later recanted and apologized for that, and they actually took that report down off of their internet page, and they retracted it from their state agency. But of course, the damage was done, and I believe that this kind of activity will continue. In other words, what they're trying to do is to demonize and marginalize those persons whose ideas they abhor. And anyone such as myself or Ron Paul who promotes the principles of federalism, constitutionalism, a limited government, et cetera, especially when we attack things like the Federal Reserve and the United Nations and these ever-growing foreign wars and all these things. They cannot allow those ideas to become dominant within the thinking of the American people. So to try and thwart the message, they try to marginalize the messenger. And that's what they're doing. They're trying to make us appear to be radicals, extremists, etc., so that people, when they hear what we have to say, will dismiss the message as being radical and extremist. It is a blatant attempt by the federal government of propagandizing against those individuals who are promoting the message that they, within the federal government and other agencies, wish to be silenced. Oath Keepers is a wonderful organization. Stuart Rhodes, I know personally, and I know that he's a great man and is a real patriot. I would encourage every police officer and every military man, whether retired or active duty, to become part of the Oath Keepers. It's a great group. It's basically what they're saying is we are going to stand for the Constitution. We are not going to allow anyone within the federal government to circumvent the laws prescribed in the Constitution. Everyone who takes an oath of office, whether it is a military man or a law enforcement officer or a politician, they all swear an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. And what Oath Keepers is saying is that we take our oath seriously, and we are going to keep our oath to the Constitution, and we're not going to allow someone else, even someone else in government, to force us to disobey our oath to the Constitution. Again, it's more of the same, trying to demonize and marginalize those individuals whose ideas the powers that be find repugnant. I would compare the war on terror to the war on drugs. They pick an adversary, an external adversary, and then they rally not only the government but the American people at large against this enemy. The problem is that by the time they're finished implementing the strategies and techniques that they're going to use against the contrived enemy, they wind up focusing primarily, as you just noted, on the American citizenry. And that's happened in the war on drugs, and it's happening in the war on terror. I mean, we would have never had the Patriot Act and all of this incessant eavesdropping and recording our phone calls and intercepting our emails and listening to our cell phone conversations and the total loss of privacy, the abridgment of habeas corpus, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, and so forth and so on, if it had not been for, quote unquote, the war on terror. I remember whenever Congressman Bob Barr was telling us that whenever he was in Congress and you had Bill Clinton in the White House, Al Gore as vice president, the Republicans had the Congress, the same exact bill was introduced in the Congress at that time. But the Republicans that controlled the Congress rejected the bill, rightly so, because they recognized it to be an overreach by the federal government into the private lives of the American people. But voila, you put a Republican in the White House, and then you have the events of 9/11 and the so-called terror attacks in New York City and Washington, D.C., and without hardly a protest, the same bill that was vehemently rejected by conservatives in Congress in the 1990s was now readily and immediately accepted by that same group in Congress. And again, it just shows that the act of terrorism was an excuse to implement something that they had already designed to do, something that they had already attempted to do, and now were able to do because of the so-called terror attack. Therefore, we have been enduring the abridgments of our freedoms and our liberties and our constitutional rights ever since. And the American citizenry is the victim of this so-called war on terror.
Could you talk about the Oklahoma City bombing and how that event was used against states' rights and against militia movements and patriot groups?
Right. Bill Clinton, I will remember those days. Bill Clinton, Janet Reno did everything they could do at that time to again demonize and marginalize quote unquote citizen militia groups. The Oklahoma City bombing was the excuse that they used at that time, just as the attack in 9/11 is the excuse that the George Bush administration and now the Obama administration are using to continue their acts of aggression against the liberties of the American people. I think anybody that has eyes to see can recognize that there's a pattern here. And no matter who's in the White House or who's in Congress, the pattern really doesn't change much. We're still marching in the same direction toward more and more government, less and less freedom. And I think we are now to the point where that individual states are going to have to start standing up immediately for the independence and sovereignty of the people of their state, representing the sovereigns of their state, the citizens of their states, or this Leviathan is going to devour virtually all the freedoms and liberties that were bequeathed to us by our founding fathers. If they can broad brush a group of people and tie us into someone with obvious radical views, someone who does obviously have a personal agenda of some sort, whatever it may be, they're going to do that. I don't think there's anything new about that. Trying to picture all of us as racist or homophobic or whatever it may happen to be, they will use anyone they can to accomplish that. I think for the most part, that's proving to be a futile strategy. I think more and more people are waking up to the reality that you cannot, with a broad brush, put everyone in a pigeonhole and make whatever point you want to make. I think that the American people, for the most part, are thinking enough for themselves to recognize the fallacy of that. But there's no question they would try to do that. I caution people not to become too enamored with Fox News. I think that it's a mistake for the American people to trust any of these major television news networks. And I've said this in my columns. I said the major difference between Fox News and CNN is that CNN will defend the Democrats while attacking all things Republican, and Fox News will defend the Republicans while attacking all things Democrat. It's not really that they are marching in a different direction. It's that they just approach it from a different angle. And that's why people have got to start thinking for themselves and recognizing that the same people that are in charge of Fox News, for example, are the same people that are promoting Hillary Clinton when she ran for the Senate, financing her campaign. The same people that are whining and dining the global elite, they're whining and dining the intellectual elite and the political elite and the commercial elite from both sides of the ocean, are the same ones that are in charge of the cable network news stations, whichever one you might want to talk about. And so while it's fine to listen to people objectively, and if you hear that which is good and you agree with it, that's fine, so be it. But be careful about becoming enamored with and thinking of some of these major TV news hosts as some kind of iconic, heroic figures, Pied Pipers of freedom, etc., when the fact of the matter is sometimes they could actually be diluting the real message of freedom and confusing the real message of freedom. So I just caution the American people to be careful about the way they they're enamored with Fox News or any other major TV news network. Who was it that first said, follow the money? Whoever said it first got it exactly right, because that's what you need to always remember. When you start following the money, it doesn't matter whether it's in politics or business or the media or even in big religion. When you start following the money, you're going to find that the bulk of it is going to wind up in the same place. It's the same cabal of people that are pulling the strings behind most of these endeavors. And that's why no matter whether it's a big television network, a big media outlet, or whether it's a big newspaper, or whether it's a big religion and super mega churches, or whether it's the business community or the political establishment, again, you're going to come back, if you follow the money, to the same basic group of people that are benefiting from the promotion of whatever angle that they choose to promote. There's a lot of things that Glenn Beck says that I really like. And he said things on major, if you want to call Fox a major network news, at least it's a major cable news network, that few other people were willing to say. And so for those reasons, I admire some of the things he said. But on the other hand, he will turn right around and either impugn or denigrate true champions of constitutional government, such as Ron Paul, and will also promote the candidacies of big government neocons. I think one of the biggest examples of that in relation to Fox News in general is the way they promote Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich is a fox, a wolf in sheep's clothing. He will say anything he needs to say to fool conservatives into supporting him. When he was Speaker of the House and the contract with America took place back in the 1994 elections, and the Republicans took over both the House and Senate, first time in over 40 years at that time, promising to eliminate 5 federal departments, to slash the overall spending and size and scope of the federal government, et cetera, et cetera. What happened after the Republicans took both houses? It was Newt Gingrich and Trent Lott who deliberately reneged on their promises and actually led the Republicans and tried to influence and coerce the Republicans, including the freshmen who had just been elected in '94, into doing the opposite of what they had campaigned for and promoting more taxes, bigger government. And look at what happened. By the time 1995 came and went, all of the promises of the '94 campaign were history. All of the agencies, not only the federal agencies, not only were they funded equally, they increased their funding. And the federal government in D.C. grew in size, shape, and scope under Newt Gingrich as Speaker of the House in 1995 and beyond, as it had been doing before the Contract of America was ever invented. Newt Gingrich, if he is allowed to become influential, if he, God forbid, becomes the Republican standard bearer in 2010, you can kiss any form of constitutional renewal, constitutional revival. You can kiss it goodbye. He will absolutely he'll destroy the Tea Party movement. He'll destroy the conservative movement, whatever is left in the Republican Party. And yet look at the way Fox promotes Newt Gingrich. That's just one example. I think that it's almost like they're playing both sides of the street at the same time. Glenn Beck, I thought, was probably the one that may have doomed the candidacy of Deborah Medina in Texas with, in my opinion, kind of a hatchet job on his show relative to her candidacy.
And supported Rick Perry, who's running with the Bilderberg Group and been a slave of the system and used to be a Democrat. And I don't mean to interrupt you, but
No, exactly right. That's what I was going to say. So again, on the one hand, you hear him saying some truly wonderful things. On the other hand, you see him doing some very, very harmful things. So I have mixed emotions. Another thing that kind of gives me gives me pause about Glenn Beck is, when we were running as an independent Constitution Party candidate in 2008, my staff tried to get me on every single one of the major cable and network news programs, including Glenn Beck. And they would not have us on. The only television talk show host that would have me on was Lou Dobbs on CNN. And look what happened to Lou Dobbs after the election. Glenn Beck would not have me on. None of the other hosts on Fox would have me on. We tried to get on. Where was the message? Who was giving the message of constitutional government in 2008? After Ron Paul was defeated in the primary, who was bringing the message? If Glenn Beck really wanted to promote the message of constitutional government, limited government, principles of freedom, the Bill of Rights, the message of the Founding Fathers, John McCain wasn't preaching that message. Barack Obama wasn't preaching that message. But Chuck Baldwin in the general election was preaching that message. And yet, we never had the opportunity one time to deliver that message to Glenn Beck's audience. They have reached a point in the evolution of all of this globalism that they really are not trying to hide it all that much anymore. It's almost an in-your-face, here we are, what are you going to do about it kind of attitude. And I think that personally, the Clintons and the Bush families are involved in many dubious and sinister activities. Don't be surprised if Hillary Clinton becomes vice president before the 2012 re-election campaign of Barack Obama. I think the globalists and the syndicate of those internationalists that are working toward the unification of the economies of the world, etc. I think they feel they need her in the White House. And it wouldn't surprise me a bit if she becomes vice president before the 2012 election. It also will not surprise me if Barack Obama wins re-election. Don't think for 1 minute that Mr. Obama is out of the election victory road here, because of all these polls and so forth that we're seeing in 2010. You got to remember that the powers that we're talking about still control the news media for the most part, and they still have the opportunity to turn elections one way or the other. And especially if the Republicans put up a neocon, an obvious, blatant neocon, somebody like a Newt Gingrich, someone of that nature, who real conservatives just could not even think about supporting. If that were the case, then Mr. Obama gets 4 more years. And if Hillary Clinton is his vice president, it puts another Clinton in the White House. And again, the Clinton-Bush cabal, in my opinion, is part of a very dubious, sinister organization that is working against the interests of freedom and liberty in this country. The difference between the Republicans and the Democrats now at the national level is that the Democrats want to tax and spend to promote the welfare state. The Republicans want to borrow and spend to promote the warfare state. But neither party in Washington, D.C. wants to live by the Constitution, wants to put the federal government under the constraints and the chains of the Constitution. Neither party in Washington, D.C. wants to do that. And the GOP, under George W. Bush, has become a an empire building, nation building, warmongering party. I think it has betrayed the fundamental precepts of what many of the old-time Republicans actually believed and stood for. I think Ron Paul's message during the primary elections of 2008 was spot on. It was only after Mr. Bush redefined conservatism that now in the minds of many Republicans and people that call themselves conservatives, including my brothers in the clergy and Christians in the churches, have come to look at undeclared, unprovoked foreign wars as some kind of a holy cause. We have lost all sense of the just war theory and why we go to war and what are the right reasons for war and how do you go to war and so forth. All the things that historically Americans believed have now been repudiated by the George W. Bush brand of republicanism to the point now that what we see today as conservatism, as it's known, is not even remotely related to what conservatism was back before George W. Bush became president. I believe we need a revolution of states. I go back to the principles of federalism that were incorporated into our Constitution that has made America what it is. That was the great experiment of 1787. The experiment was you would have two governments, two nation states, if you please, living side by side, each respecting the constraints and the jurisdiction of the other. The federal government respecting the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, accepting the definitions of its role under the Constitution, the states recognizing their authority under the Constitution, and the rights of their citizens under the Bill of Rights, understanding the 10th Amendment gave them much greater power and latitude than the federal government ever could have. And the states respecting the federal government in the role that it was given them, the federal government respecting the states in the role that was given to them, living side by side, harmoniously, peacefully. That was the great experiment of the U.S. Constitution. What's happened is the federal government has grown in power to the point that it is swallowing up the states, and it is causing the principles of federalism to be destroyed. The revolution we need is a revolution of state governments backed by the governors, the legislators, the attorneys general, the courts of the states, and of course ultimately by we the people, the sovereigns of that state, with their own will and yes, with their own arms, that are willing to defend the principles of constitutionalism and federalism as prescribed in those great founding documents. And so that's why I say if the only thing we have in 2010 and 2012 is another, quote, conservative movement, all it's going to do is fuel the same system. The same system that is destroying us is going to continue to grow, and there'll be no change. And so what we need is a revolutionary idea, similar to what happened in 75 and 76, when the founders said, we are not going to be ruled by one central state. We are going to incorporate a system of law and governance whereby the people will govern themselves under law. And here is the law. And they established this federalist system, a confederation of nation states, whereby each state is free and independent and able to protect the rights and sanctity of its own borders and its own citizenry. And until we get people in the states to recognize that responsibility and that duty, and in a revolutionary manner stand up for those rights and those duties, all we're going to do is to continue to fuel the same beast, the same system that is swallowing up the liberties and the freedoms of the American people. It's really not a left-right battle. It's not a conservative-liberal battle. It really is, it's a Constitution battle. It is an independence battle. It is a battle for the independence of our states, the sovereignty of our states, the sovereignty of our country, the rights and liberties of our citizenry against a burgeoning New World Order, an order of globalism of international scale, a cabal of people that really do despise our form of government and really do want to eradicate the principles of freedom upon which it was established. This is not a battle between left and right or between conservative and liberal. I had, in my campaign in 2008, I could not tell you how many people that would identify themselves as moderates or even leaning to the left that supported me enthusiastically. They may not have agreed with everything that I believed on the social issues, but they understood my commitment to freedom and liberty and constitutional government, federalism, etc. And at the end of the day, that is going to be the issue that is either going to revive freedom in this country or bury freedom in this country, depending on how we respond to this battle. So, no, I agree with you. And that's why I don't worry about people that identify themselves in one way or the other politically. We talk about the Constitution, freedom, liberty, the Bill of Rights, federalism, etc. And it's amazing how many people, especially young people today, that resonate with that message. My family and I, which includes 17 people and 5 families, have decided to, after 35 years living here in Pensacola, Florida, my wife and I started this church from scratch 35 years ago. We've poured our hearts and soul into this ministry. We have friends of a lifetime here. This is an excruciating, gut-wrenching decision. But we made the decision a few weeks ago that we were going to move lock, stock, and barrel, all of us, to the northwestern part, the Flathead Valley of Montana. Why in the world would anybody leave the sunny south and the beaches of the Gulf Coast for the cold and snow of the Rocky Mountains? We really believe, as I've been talking about in this interview, the importance of states standing up for the freedoms and liberties that have been guaranteed to us in the Constitution. In my travel, over 60,000 miles in the last 2 years, from coast to coast and border to border, I've seen just about every part of this country that there is to see. And I've seen the states in which freedom is pretty much non-existent. And I've seen the states where there is a love of liberty still burning brightly in the hearts of the people. And I found that most in the mountain states. Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas, Utah, even across the border in Alberta and British Columbia, Alaska. I found that there was still a group of people that loved liberty, understood the principles of liberty, and were willing to fight for it. And I really believe, and my family all agree with me, that if there is any hope for a revival and a restoration of liberty in this country, it's only going to come in and through those states that are willing to stand and fight for those liberties. And quite frankly, I don't see a lot of states that are willing to do that. But I do feel that many of those mountain states, including Montana, still have it in their heart to fight for those principles. And so we're going there. We're not going there to vacation. We're not going there to bask in the sun or ski or hide or hibernate. We are going there to fight. We're going there to work. We're going there to stand shoulder to shoulder with freedom-loving people, and whatever talents and abilities and gifts and voice that we can bring to that part of the world, we just want to lend our assistance to those people and spend the rest of our lives fighting for the liberty that God has given to us. And so here in just a few weeks, we're going to be gone, and we are going to find a new home, and who knows? Who knows? In the 1880s, Montana experienced a gold rush. And I'm thinking in the 2010s, Montana might experience a freedom rush. And we want to be part of that rush.
Visit Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. When you're on the site, you can also tune in 24 hours a day to my daily radio broadcast. There's also a free iPhone app to listen to the syndicated radio show when and where you want.